So anyway, so the question then is, you know, these are the essentially the points where you can optimize and you can come up with better methods, because otherwise it's just, you know, if I had to just compare two graphs whether they are the same, or if I had to give two graphs and check whether one is contained in the other, there are well-known algorithms for that and you can use those. And like I said, for the subgraph isomorphism checking, it's a NP-hard problem. But actually the good the good news and the bad news. Okay, so the good news is that almost every data mining problem is NP-hard, or you know, so these things we want to do are really hard problems, right? So in that sense this is not unique. And so the good news is that even though things are NP-hard or this thing, you should not stop you from still coming up with better and better methods, because in practice you can actually solve many problems, and the worst case obviously, you know, will stump you, right? So it's not that we are going after the worst case. We are saying that on average we can still do fairly well on many data sets, and for some data sets you're going to fail miserably, but that's known, right? But that shouldn't we can't say we give up and we won't do anything, right? So anyway, that's the situation. So how can we improve things? So let me just tell you some of the common algorithms, and I will try to go a bit quicker, because now you know at least what the problem is. So let me start with the first approach, which is again an extension of a well-known technique. But so this is the main. I want to skip on all the, you know, the writing. So I think graphically I can illustrate it much better. So this was the first sort of set of method that was proposed for extension. So I told you, right, how we want to extend things. So this method was actually so the basic intuition is this. So let's say I'm doing a level wise, meaning a breadth first expansion. Okay, so let's say I get all the single edges and then I extend them. I get all the graphs with two edges and I extend them, and I get all the graphs with three edges, and so on and so forth, right? So at some point you are given all the frequent graphs with, let's say, k edges, and I want to add one more edge. So I want to basically generate the next frontier, the next set of candidates for k plus 1 edges, right? So that's the setting. Okay, so you have done a lot of work already, so you shouldn't throw it away. So I know which of these graphs are already frequent, and they all have k edges, because that's my current frontier in my breadth first search, right? So how should I generate my next level? I mean, you could do like essentially random extension, you know, take any graph and say I'm going to try all possible labels, but that's pointless, because you already know everything that's frequent with k edges, right? So can I look at my neighbor, or you know, can I look for patterns that share some common core and then see what can I learn about those? Because see, the problem is this: when you talk about labels, I could literally have thousands of labels in my data set, right? So there is a big penalty if I try to check every label each time, like, because for every edge I extend I have to try all possible labels, and so if I have 1,000 labels, I'm basically counting that graph 1,000 times. So I want to be able to prune the label space quickly as well, right? So the basic intuition here is that let's look for a common subgraph of size k minus 1. So remember, I'm at level k. I know all the graphs that are frequent at that level, and I want to add one more edge. So what I do is I sort of say, let's look for a common core of size k minus 1, a subgraph of size k minus 1, and I'm going to learn from this class of graphs which labels actually appear frequently among them and which edges appear frequently among them, and I'm going to use those to generate my k plus 1 level. So the idea would be this. So I take two graphs, right? So if you look at the top row, the left and the right, so these have what, 4 edges in common. So I'm sorry, 4 edges total per graph. So I'm at level 4, and they share that 3 edge pattern in common, right? The triangle. And by the way, the colors mean different labels. Okay, so these are 3 different labels on those nodes, and then I have the white label is the you know, so one of them is off of the blue node and one of them is off of the purple vertex, right? So what do you think should be the next level candidates, right? So given that you know that this is the common 3 edge subgraph, the possible choices are only two of those. Okay, either that label actually should be joined because the purple and the blue nodes should be joined together, because one of them, right, one of them has white, the other has white, so maybe I can join them, or maybe actually I should keep them separate, right? So what we're doing is we're saying that let's look at what's already known and enumerate the possible candidates for the next level, because I don't know in my graph what really happened, right? Because I have to count, because this is based on frequency. So maybe it is that this guy is also frequent and that guy is also frequent. Some of the times when this pattern occurs, they merge together. Some of the times they occur together, they actually split, and I have to enumerate all of them. And so that's the basic idea, is that they do what is known as joining. Okay, so you look at your patterns of a given size that are frequent, which is level k. In this case, k is 4. And then you look for this common subgraphs, and you try to join them and see what happens. And it's not that simple every time, because what stumps you is actually what is known as the automorphism problem, right? So if you think of this pattern, you can join the pattern with itself, right? So because they have the 4 purple nodes, and you can actually permute them in any way, and you get the same graph back, right? So it turns out that this actually leads to many more candidates for the next level. So we have to actually worry about the automorphism group, which is the number of isomorphisms of this common structure. So if it's all distinct, it's much easier. If you have symmetry inside the graph, then it gets a little bit harder, right? So you get the idea that you have to make sure you don't miss anything. So that's the basic intuition behind this first class of methods, is that you do level-wise growth, look for common subgraph, and then look for possible extensions from that. All right, so I'm not going to go into all the other things. I'm going to skip all this, because then I want to actually come to a very interesting point, which is so this is actually just showing you now so yeah, I think this is worth spending time over, which is that basically this is the same paradigm I told you before. Start with single edges, right? Then go to 2 graphs, 3 graphs, and so on and so forth, right? And then some of them are isomorphic, so you throw them away. So duplicate checking, right? So now we come to the notion of this pattern has already been well, actually, let's see, or maybe it's not frequent. So it also depends. When you're joining things, you either throw it away because it's duplicate, or you throw it away because it's not frequent. So anyway, that's sort of and you go on and try to combine things and get the next level. Okay, so the main thing I want to talk about now is what are the this slide. So how do you detect the graph isomorphism part? So this is a very again well studied problem in graph theory. What we call the canonical representation. Okay, so any given graph can be represented in many different ways, right? So what we are trying to do is we are trying to come up with some sort of a coding, because I have to check all the edges and I have to check all the labels, and I can say there could be labels on the edges as well, there could be labels on the nodes. So is there a way of representing the graph as a string? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, if I have to compare 2 graphs and I have to check whether they're equal or whether one is so we'll talk a little bit about one being less than the other in terms of the labeling. So basically different isomorphisms of this graph can be represented by codes, and an example of a code is this matrix code, which is what this method uses. So not only the method does it this systematic sort of join enumeration, it also uses this code to determine which of the candidates to keep. So if you generate another graph, whether to know its duplicate or not. So as an example, if you take this AAB with XYZ as the edge labels, here's one permutation of the vertices, right? So actually if you think about it, any permutation of the vertices is going to generate a different code. So here's one permutation of the vertices, so I order them AAB, AAB, and then the way you interpret this matrix is that if there's an edge between the A and the A, you put the you put the edge label in that cell. So because there's an edge between the A and the label is Y, you have that entry Y in that particular cell. In this case, it's of course a cycle, so it's a complete graph. But in general, they'll be missing, there'll be empty nodes in the matrix because the edge may not exist in the graph. So this is just another way of representing it. This is another permutation of the vertices. In this case, the A, which is that, let's see. So the x, there are two A's. So one of them is the other one. So the YZ. So the top A is actually the one that's last, and the first A is the one that's on the left. So anyway, so you can so the problem now is that you get all these different codes, and you have to define you have to define a total order on them. Okay, which one is less than the other, and the least code is what is called as the representative code, and that is what we'll use to eliminate duplicates. So whenever you give me a graph and it's a particular code, I'll check whether it is canonical or not. So we say whether the code is canonical, and we use the canonical code for duplicate elimination. So this is just the representational part. Of course, it doesn't yet solve. You have to have the algorithm for enumerating the minimal code and so on, which I'm not going to go into. There are actually known methods to do that, but this is just to give you the idea that you have to think of all these things when you're designing a good graph mining algorithm, right? So one is how to detect duplicates, the next is how to count, how to search, and so on. So that's the first sort of algorithm that I wanted to mention, is this level-wise search. So that's this method called the a priori, which comes actually from the set mining problem. So this was the first, let's say, efficient method for pattern discovery. I mean, many other people discovered similar things, so it's not that they discovered it, but in the domain of frequent patterns, these guys were the first to sort of show that this kind of level-wise, breadth first search with pruning is very effective. So and they called it the so-called a priori algorithm. So this graph mining approach essentially follows the same basic paradigm. And now I'm going to show an alternative approach, which is the G-span approach. So here the best thing again is so now you know the problem, and so you might think, okay, I've given you an algorithm and you want to improve it, right? So what are the different ways you can improve the method? Maybe you can improve the search. Maybe keeping the breadth first search is not a good thing, right? So that's one option. The other is maybe this joining process is a bit complex, right? So you saw, for every level I have to look for the common subgraph. And then for the common subgraph, I have to look for these edges and I have to join them. Is there a better way, right? So maybe I can improve that part. And then the third part would be this code, this matrix code. Is a different code practically better, right? So actually, in the worst case, they're probably the same. There's no difference. But maybe in practice, some codes turn out to be better. So actually, those are essentially the ways in which this method actually improves upon the previous one. So let me jump directly to the code first, because this is actually a very interesting idea that this is actually in some sense the main idea behind this method, is that for a given graph, they define something called the depth first code. And among all the possible depth first codes, they'll again choose the canonical one, the minimal one. Okay, you define a total order and you pick one member as a representative. So given a graph like this, so first of all, what is the DFS code? So what you do is you traverse the edges in depth first order, and you mark the edges as being forward or backward. A backward edge is the one that introduces a cycle, and a forward edge is like a tree edge. So what we're doing is we're making a DFS tree over a graph, and we are going to generate a corresponding code in our the representation, the string representation of the graph. So the first edge is from x to y with x to y with the label a. So that's the x, a, y. And the 0, 1 just says I'm going from a node numbered 0 to a node numbered 1, right? So in a depth first walk, the node 0 is the x and node 1 is y. Okay, so that's the first edge. Then you say, what else can I do? In this case, let's not worry about the choices you have, but I'm going to show you one particular code. So here's another code. So then from the y you can go to the third x, and so then I can add another edge in my pattern saying this is vertex 0 goes to vertex 1 goes to vertex 2. So that's, and then this particular edge is from 1 to 2, with the y to the x with the label b, right? So that's the kind of thing you do. And then I can go one more down, and I can get my, actually no, so here The reason I go back I'll explain later, because that has to do with the total ordering that I'm going to have. So essentially the rule of the thumb is that you either go depth first, but if there's a cycle to be completed, you complete the cycle before you go down. Okay, so that's the general principle. That's the ordering that I'll talk about shortly. So from this you actually go back first, because there is a cycle to be completed from this x, and so I take that cycle. Okay, that's called a backward edge, and so I add the backward edge to my code, and so on. So then what else? From x I've exhausted all backward edges, so then I can only go forward. So from this x I go to the z, and then you can see what's going to happen. From this z you have to complete that cycle, and then you backtrack, and then the final would be the yz that you haven't touched. So anyway, that leads to the final code. So this sequence, right, is again a string representation of a graph. So the sequence of edges and the labels and the IDs, so that this becomes a, if you concatenate them, that's a code. And the idea is to choose the minimum among these. So of course I could have traversed the graph in a different way. So among all the possible ways you can traverse the graph, you are going to order these nodes, and you're going to choose the least code as the representative one for that graph. So that's the contribution. And the reason this works out is because among all the codes, so see here, just elaborating that example even more. So for a given graph G, which is the pattern you're interested in, there are lots and lots of ways of coming up with depth first traversals and the back edges and so on. Among them you have to choose one, and the minimal one in this example is C. So this one is the minimal code. Why is it minimal? Of course I haven't told you why it is minimal, but it has to do with this notion of when you compare labels and you compare the edges, right? So you have to compare two things. You're either lexicographically smaller in terms of labels, or you're smaller in terms of some ordering of the edges. And the basic principle is this, that you prefer deeper trees, and as opposed to branchier trees. I mean, you could define the code any way you want. I mean, the point is that you have to have just a systematic way of defining what is less than what. As long as you can do that, you can get your systematic enumeration out of the way. So anyway, that is what we call the minimal DFS code. You still have to search this. Okay, so it's not that we have solved the problem. It's just a representation issue. Instead of matrices, I'm going to use this DFS code. But the advantage here is that this DFS code gets me. So this is actually the explanation of the DFS code in some sense, that which leads to this. It's not that clear. I'm sorry. It leads to the. So let's say you have a given graph, a given pattern you want to check. Okay, so that's the pattern on the left side, and the black nodes are just showing you the depth first. One of the depth first traversals of that which turned out to be canonical. And so that is this rearranged in the depth first order. So basically this says start with vertex 1, which is labeled A. Okay, from vertex 1 go to vertex 2, which is labeled which is also labeled A. So if you see the horizontal edge up there, and then from that A there are these two children, there are some back edges, and then from that A come back and visit vertex 3, which is the one in the middle up there, which is labeled C, and so on and so forth. So I've taken that those black edges and represented them as a tree, and all the back edges, all the cycles are basically these arcs, right? Okay, so why is this code good? Because this is why it helps. Now I want to add one more edge to this graph. Okay, so you have a DFS code. Somehow you got the canonical one, what we call the minimal code, and now I want to grow this pattern by adding one more edge. How would you do it? So what this code allows us to do, and this is actually a very good point, it says that any extension you do can only be done on the rightmost path. Okay, so in other words, if you want to extend this, in general, given a graph, I can extend it from this vertex, I can add one more vertex here, I can add one more vertex here, I can add a cycle between C and D, right? There's lots of possible ways of extending the graph by adding one more edge. But the DFS code, the way we order them, it says that if you were to do that, if you were to add an edge between these two, it will result in a non-minimal code. Okay, so there's no point trying to add an edge between that. It also says that if you try to extend any one of these guys by adding another vertex, it's going to lead to a non-minimal code. So don't do that at all. And the only extension that you can try, or that you should try, are from the rightmost path. So you basically take basically from the root of your tree to the rightmost child, and you may try any of these forward edges. Okay, so if you can add one more vertex from the rightmost path, or if you want to add cycles, the cycles can only be added from the rightmost child. So this was that thing I told you before, that complete cycles before you go forward or you take a branch. So this goes back to the same principle. So basically what this says is that the only extensions are, if you are at the rightmost child, first you try to complete the cycles, and you try to complete the cycle to the furthest node back in the tree in the DFS order. So that's what I call extension number 1. Extension number 2 is the next cycle that you might complete, and then there are no more cycles to be completed from B. So then the only option is to go forward. You can either take a extension there, and if you've done that, then you can go and take a branch from here, take a branch from here, and so on. So there are actually 6 possible extensions from this. So what we've done is we've actually systematically restricted our space to search only in one direction, and this cuts down on the number of duplicates that we're going to have. It doesn't yet mean that we will never have duplicates. We can still have duplicates, but we are restricting the set of duplicates. We are saying that the obviously non-isomorphic, those will definitely be non-minimal. We don't have to search. So anyway, that's the basic idea, and I think I can go ahead and skip on to the next. So I'm just going to go over all this very quickly. This is just showing you the same, the search. Ultimately, you're not really changing the search space. The space is the same. It's the way in which you search the space, and which thing you prune better, the systematic way. And basically this is just showing you like an example of a non-minimal code, because this code is the CCA, right, which actually is the same as this pattern, the ACC. I mean, this is a simple example. It's just a chain, but in general you have this notion of something being minimal. So ACC has to come before CCA. In this case, it's because of the lexicographic order. Okay, AC is less than CC, so you can throw away the CCA because that's not going to be minimal. So that's on that side. All right, so now we're going to get, so this is the state of the art. Okay, so what I've shown you are the 2 sort of common approaches for graph mining, and a more or less state of the art. I mean, you can again do some more things. So for example, there is a work that says that many of the real world graphs are sparse, right? So if they are sparse, then the work says that actually why don't you just enumerate chains first. Okay, so just do paths, and then once you've done the paths, do the trees, because for tree mining, for sequence mining, we can do it much faster, right? The isomorphism is polynomial time, duplicate checking is much faster, and then once you've exhausted this, then you go to the graph mining part. Okay, so these cycles are the ones that cause problem, so you should tackle the cycles only in the very end, once I know all the trees and the paths, and then I can join them. So that's a so there are still ways of practically improving the problem, but ultimately there is this practical problem that you do get for many of these data sets. You're going to bump into this notion of too many patterns, right? I mean, ultimately we are trying to, given a threshold, you're trying to find everything that's frequent, and it's combinatorially a very large space. So there's no way of controlling that output size. And so you might wonder, what should we do in that case, because there are just too many things. So as an example, if you take these real world compounds or protein structures, and this is probably also going to happen in social networks with rich attributes and so on, this notion of completeness. Okay, so this was kind of like the mindset of the data mining sort of community, that we're going to enumerate everything, right? And so sometimes that may not be the best thing, because if you try to enumerate everything, I mean, think of a graph pattern of size 60. You cannot actually mine it, right? Because if you start level wise, at least you can't do it unless you have clever ways of jumping in the space. If I start doing all 1 edge patterns, 2 edge patterns, 3 edge patterns, 2 to the 60 is more than the number of atoms in the universe, or about the same order, and your computation is never going to finish. So in other words, you can never really mine large frequent graphs. And in social networks, you can have a group of size 1,000, right, which appears frequently. So clearly, there are limitations of complete mining in any case. So this is essentially the point is that, okay, how do you tackle those kinds of problems where you have to get some answers, get some patterns, but you can't afford to mine everything. So what is the solution? The solution is sampling, at least one of the solutions. So that's I'm just going to quickly give you the intuition behind the sampling idea, and then I'll conclude with thoughts, right? How much? I have another 10 minutes, right? Yeah, so that I think we are in good. So you see the graph search space that I talked about before. So it's like, you know, this search space, right? So essentially this is if I throw that away, anything that survives is a frequent pattern, right? So the idea is actually very simple. You want to sample in this space. Now you don't know the space because, you know, till you mine you don't know what the space looks like. But this is a well-known technique in you know, search, optimization, you know, in that kind of problem where you can do sampling, Monte Carlo Markov chain sampling, for example. So the idea here is that I'm going to randomly start extending things. Okay, so I'm going to just pick one edge, and then I'm going to randomly add some other edges, randomly add more edges, and see what happens. Eventually, there are no more edges you can add, and the pattern is one of the patterns they're going to output. So let me illustrate that idea first. So this is actually what I call pretty much a random walk over what I call chains of the output space. Okay, so output space is, you know, one edge at a time. You're adding one more edge to an existing pattern. So you're given your input data set, which is actually the same data set I've shown before. So you pick any edge at random. In this case, I chose AA, and you check whether it's frequent. Okay, so you count it, and actually it turns out that it is frequent in this case, right? The two black edges, so it's appearing twice. So we are good. If it were not frequent, I would throw it away, and I'd pick another edge. Okay. So anyway, in this case we are lucky or whatever, so we get a frequent. Now I say so now actually even going to discard this notion of rightmost extension, because I'm sampling, I have to sample because I no longer have the luxury of systematic enumeration, right? So I'm going to extend from any vertex. So I may add edge here, I may add edge here at random, pick a random label and test it. So in this case I choose a B, and it turns out that we are not that lucky. Okay, if I go and count, it appears only once. So we can't do anything with this pattern anymore. So we backtrack, or we throw this edge away, and I try another edge. Okay, so I try another edge, and this time we are lucky. It actually turns out to be, you know, AAC appears twice, so we are good. So now I can grow the pattern even more, right? So you get the idea. Just keep on adding one more edge. If it's not frequent, throw it away. If it's not frequent, you can't do anything. If you get lucky, you add that edge, and then continue. And in this case, I'm now adding a cycle even. Right? You can add a cycle between existing things, but that turns out to be not frequent. And ultimately, what will happen is, once you are at a given stage and no other possibility. So here's basically what you have to do is you have to enumerate the neighborhood of the pattern. What are the different edges I could have added? And randomly, of course, in this space I'm picking at random, but I'm going to mark it off. That is, I tried this random extension, it didn't work. I tried that random extension, it didn't work. Right? Ultimately, you're going to mark off all of those, and then I know there is no other extension I can try. And at that point, I know I have found I have found a maximal graph, and I'm going to output that. And then I'm going to continue this way. So in this example, for example, I'm just showing you conceptually that from that graph, this is the space of possible maximal pattern that I had mentioned before. And so what you're doing is you're actually walking the chain, right? So chain here in this case is just you do a depth first walk by adding one more, edge to the pattern. So an example of a chain would be you go to the AA, you go to the AAC, then you go to that one, right? This is the example I just showed. And you found one maximal pattern. Another walk, you may go here, you may go there and output that. You may come here, you may go there, you may get back. So you're going to have, you basically repeat this k times, do k steps and see, there are going to be duplicates. but we know how to eliminate duplicates, right? We can use any of these codes, the DFS code or the matrix code, and in the end I can throw away the duplicates. So that's not the main problem. And it turns out this is actually quite reasonable and quite fast actually. So I took a graph data set, the one I didn't really go into, but when you do the complete mining you cannot do it because it just keeps on running and running and running and running. And it turns out that if you do this random walk thing, what I'm showing here is the the number of walks on the x side. So it's basically from about 2,000 random walks. And what I'm showing is so the crosses, by the way, are the number of unique patterns found. Okay, so the unique maximal patterns found up to this point, because I can eliminate duplicates and see how many things I'm finding. And then this one is just the time it takes to do it. So let's not worry about the time for the time being. So, but you can see that as you do more and more walks, I'm discovering less and less new things, right? Now, of course, you see in this process I never know when I'm done, because it is possible that after another 2,000 steps I may discover something new, right? But maybe that's not the point anyways, because at this point the curve has pretty much leveled off, and that region of space is very hard to get at anyways, because I have not yet seen anything from that space. And as all this says is that in fact in this particular example I knew exactly what the answer was via different means, and it turned out that actually by about 1,400 walks you have discovered everything. Okay, and all it took was just 450 seconds. And so I mean, just to give you an idea that there is a scope for heuristics and other search methods to actually get you good answers quickly, and then one can worry about the theory behind this, right? So the theory is that in this case there is no guarantee. Okay, so it's not a good quality, but it works in practice. It's very fast, but ultimately I cannot say that you've actually sampled well in this space, right? And then there are ways of improving that, but then you sacrifice. I'm just going to skip over because I really don't have the time to go over this. But the conclusion here is that you can get a statistical guarantee of uniformness, but then efficiency becomes the problem. Okay, so you sacrifice something. So there is still a lot of work to be done in this area. And then I'm just going to show and not go over the slides too much, but I want to talk about this notion of instead of exact isomorphism, you can even do inexact isomorphism, because in real problems sometimes the labels don't match exactly. Like in this case I'm showing well, this is the exact isomorphism, but what if I had a cost? So if you could define some sort of a similarity between labels, right? So this is very common in text documents and other things. Two documents may be similar, but they're not the same document, or they don't have exactly the same set of attributes. So can I then discover common groups and things with these similarities in mind? And so here's a sort of a future or current direction. People are looking at things like these. We have looked at this kind of a problem where you do approximate subgraph isomorphism. So in other words, you can preserve all the edges, but the labels can have costs, and you can even make it harder by having missing edges and missing vertices. So that would be a structural mismatch and a label mismatch. So approximations on those axes. All right, so I'm going to jump ahead because I'm running out of time. I just wanted to say that that kind of work is being done. It has practical applications, so a lot of slides here. Let's not go over that. All right, so I just wanted to conclude with some thoughts about the future, and I think I sort of mentioned this along the way, that we are very far, right? We are very far from the vision of computer science essentially enabling what I would say, making people's lives much easier. So of course we have made a lot of progress if you think about the web and search and where we were 15 years back and where we are now, right? So in such a short period of time we have actually achieved a lot. So it's not to discount any of that, but I think we have to think of the future, right? What lies ahead, and what lies ahead is, it's a monster, but also with monsters come opportunities, right? So this is the problem we have to tackle, because every field, like I said, is struggling with this notion of very complex data sets, and I think we have to think of tools that make it much easier to extract information from these kinds of complex data sets. And the complexity comes from many different sources, right? It's either lots of rich labels, temporal, spatial, multiple labels, weighted. A lot of the data is distributed, right? It's not exactly in one place, so you really can't run this dedicated mining on one spot. And I think things that we don't really deal with too well are these notions of uncertainty, right? Real world data is noisy, it's not clean, and there are actually very few people really working in this area. And I think that's a huge opportunity of how to deal with uncertainty in terms of mining and other problems. And this, we have to sort of drop this obsession with optimal solutions, right? I mean, real world is not optimal. I mean, you have to get near optimal fast. So that's the point. How do we come up with methods that are, I mean, optimization as a field, and we are borrowing a lot of things from them in mining and other areas. But I think there's an opportunity to take it to the next level, which is to get very fast near optimal solutions with good guarantees, where it's possible. Of course, in some problems it's not possible to do so. But then heuristics may still be good enough, right? So if you can prove it, good. But if you cannot prove it, then at least empirically you should be, working in that. So anyway, so linked data, networks, and so on. And these are just a bunch of slides showing the proliferation, in every field that we know of, web, bioinformatics, very complex structures, proteins, genes, networks, astronomy, ecological informatics, right? So these are all emerging applications actually, and we need tools for doing this: geoinformatics, chem informatics, materials, so on and so forth. Anyway, so I've already mentioned that. So I just want to take a couple of minutes to sort of maybe talk about, well, this is where we are, right? So this is in some sense the convergence of these different ideas from different fields, and data science is one of those areas that is making a big move. And I think insofar as as it's a buzzword, it's also a real need, right? People are feeling the pain and they are asking for these tools. So it's not that something you should discount and say, oh, it's just another buzzword. There is a real sort of technical sort of contribution to be made in this area, and it doesn't really, in the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you call it. But the problem is that we want to make these things easier for people to mine and analyze and explore. All right, so as I said, I just wanted to say a few things about QCRI. And QCRI again is the Qatar Computing Research Institute, and some of the data mining efforts that we are doing is trying to address some of these problems. Of course, it's a large problem, a lot of people have to contribute to it, but my pet projects are these intuitive data mining frameworks and dealing with this big data. So I'll quickly mention two projects that I'm currently trying to do. So one is this sort of what I call the frontiers of science as a concrete example. So this is just like saying that essentially what search does for regular documents, we want to do something for research ideas. So look at published literature, look for how to summarize knowledge fields, and look for the cutting edge topics and so on. What are the trends? What are the open problems? And the tools that can help us get there. And the next one, very obvious one is, given the scale of things, right? How can we mine a petabyte today? Okay, is it really possible? What does it take? And what kind of methodology do you need? The programming languages, the parallel infrastructure, the storage, the indexing, and of course the analysis, right? So and mining algorithms on top. So we are working on those problems. And then a final slide about QCRI. It's as I said, it's a great place to actually spend the time, because they're trying to, they have good resources, and it's actually a national research lab in some sense that is trying to address these computing needs. And there are lots of different areas in QCRI. Data analytics and mining is the one in which I am, but we're doing a lot of work in social computing, in language technologies in general, like natural language, text, and of course, being in the geographic region They are also focusing on Arabic a lot. Distributed system, cloud, platform, cybersecurity, health, bioinformatics. So these are actually different groups in the institute. And just one last slide is that we're looking for talent, as everyone else is. So we have lots of open positions in data mining, especially for these projects that I mentioned, this intuitive frameworks and so on. So if you're interested, please check out this QCRI site, and you may drop me an email. Okay, thank you.
A couple of comments. First of all, like, if you didn't understand everything, there is not a big problem because Zach will be back like in August and will teach you more. Right? So it's kind of an advertisement that they take. So let me understand this better. And we are a bit late, but we have time for a couple of questions if you might have. Yep.
The random walk, there are the new graphs. In what university that you do that? You consider the data, like the graph topology, you're supposed to see how you can extend them, or do you should be data planning?
Okay, so the thing is that you should keep some minimal information. So what we do is we do a local expansion. So to make it efficient, I mean, in the purest form, you would not look at the data at all, right? You'll just, this is the pattern, and I'm going to try all possible. But given the number of labels and so on, it makes it impractical to do that. So what you should do is you should keep sort of maybe counters. So once you do that, because in the process of finding the frequency, you have to enumerate the embeddings, right? And so you actually know. So for the time being, you know that information, so you can actually look at the neighborhood around that. So to make it efficient, you look at the neighborhood and say, these are the possible labels I should try. And you can do frequency counting and prune a few things right away. Yeah.
Then you said after a few minutes you already have all the patterns. Then you compare to the exact approach and you say you have millions of patterns.
Millions of, no. So sorry. So I should say that this method that I did was for maximal subgraphs. So first I ran GSpan, right? And GSpan never finished because maximal patterns are pretty large. And so it's not fair to compare with that number as such. But even a complete, well, in this case, a complete maximal miner would have probably done a good job. But this was just to show that the flavor of the problem. It's not. Yeah, you're right. It's not. I'm not comparing exactly the right numbers. So that's all the possible subgraphs are millions of those, but the maximal ones are only 90 or so.
Okay. Olga?
So yeah.
So my question is also about this random walk strategy. Did you look into how well it would work on different kinds of data sets? Like, for instance, does it work better on geometric structures like biology or chemical kind of graphs? Or does it work better on small world graphs or maybe even almost random graphs? Did you compare that?
We didn't.
You find all the
Yeah, no, actually, we didn't really. I would say we didn't systematically see what in other words, we didn't do a study of the graph properties and the output of the mining. We did take a bunch of data sets. So it's not, we tried chemical compounds, we tried some other, data sets for the evaluation, but we didn't really go into depth as to what makes it better, So in other words, it's like you have a conventional way, like the complete way, and for some of these, the complete works fine, right? And then, so yeah, I think that's still to be done, meaning,
because it's
yeah.
probably quite different, right? The structure of the graph that you're
Yeah. Yeah, I guess our end goal was that if you have very large graphs, you can't do the complete search sort of, it's kind of hard to do, especially not the breadth first, maybe there are other ways. So this was a way to get around that. But that's a good point, to look at the actual characteristic, whether it's a, very sparse structure, what kind of distribution does it have, clustering structure it has.
You can maybe even just generate artificial
examples,
and then look
yeah.
how quickly it covers
Yep.
all the time.
You can do that. So there was a question, yeah.
Does QCRI have any partnerships with the university itself regarding exchanging students or?
Oh yes, sorry, yeah. I should mention that we have a very active, I should say, internship program. So where students can come and spend time at QCRI. So one is the the hiring sort of after you graduate, but even during during the study we have internship positions. Yes.
Okay, so let's thank Professor Zach again.